Hey there, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Got a lot of questions here that I want to address. If you're new to the series, my name is Scott. I'm with Artist Network, and this is Drawing Together. We are working on this drawing of the strawberry. You'll find the reference image in the description below the video. You'll also find links to additional resources at artistnetwork.com, as well as all the past episodes. So share your work. If you go to that link, the Drawing Together page on Artist Network, you'll find links to the subsequent individual show pages where there are discussion threads. People have been sharing their work, commenting, and it's been awesome. I want to get to some of the questions here about the materials. I am working on the smooth Hahnemuhle paper. It's about 8.5 by 11.5. It's a European size, a little bit different than that. It's a smooth surface. I'll be working in graphite today, and I decided to pull out. This is a Cretacolor Nero pencil. It's a soft pencil, and honestly, I don't even really know what the material is, but I love it. It seems to be working really well with the graphite. A carbon pencil will also work very nicely. You might try like a black colored pencil if you have it. I've just been starting to add a few areas in here to bring in some of the depth. I found that the graphite that I was using was a little subtle. I'll be working actually mostly with this, it's an Ebony pencil, very soft graphite pencil. So whatever pencil you've got, follow along. If you have just a regular #2 pencil, you'll be able to accomplish quite a bit with that. Mariana, you have a question about where to acquire the Hahnemuhle paper. I think your local art supply store may carry it. It's not necessarily found at every art supply store. Definitely check it out online. You should be able to find it somewhere online as well. But I'd like to go into my local Jerry's to see what they've got there. Let's see. I think we got all the questions. We got people joining in from all over. I love seeing you all shout out where you're watching from. Sharon, you have a question about the sharpening of the pencils. As you can see, what I do here, I like to do this with my pencils. This isn't just kind of a thing that I like to do. I use a razor blade on this end to expose the core. So if I can pull that out right here. So I just use a regular kind of a box cutter and I carve away that core. One of the things that I've learned to do though is I try to almost spiral it when I carve, kind of go at a slight angle. And that helps to kind of ease into that cut a little bit. Sometimes you can get under the grain of the wood, pop up a big chunk, and sometimes take the pencil along with it. So I just kind of ease into it, cutting at a slight angle, rotating it around to expose some of that wood, kind of file off a bit of it, making a mess here on the table. And then what I'll use is sandpaper to kind of file that down. And then on this side, it's just using a regular pencil sharpener to keep a fine point there. I've been having issues with my pencil sharpener actually lately, so this is it. I need to get a sharper blade. So I'll be doing my best actually with this end here. I also have my shading stump. I use that. I'm going to be using that a lot. My kneaded eraser, as well as a fresh new rubber eraser. So this was. I knew it was going to be a challenge, but I didn't realize how much of a challenge it was going to be until I got into this preparatory one. So what I realized that this is ultimately about is about managing the detail, especially with all of those seeds. And how do you do that? How do you maintain that sense of volume in that strawberry while finding that balance between having enough detail to show what you're looking at, but also not having so much that you feel overwhelmed by it. So I'm going to kind of go through some of the strategies that I used to create this preparatory one. I learned quite a bit just doing this one here. See a lot of people shouting out where you're from, so that's very awesome. Let's see. Mark, I see that you have a question about something being frustrating. I don't know if I missed something, but oh yes, breaking the pencils. So that happens a lot. Sometimes what I've noticed is that actually has to do with the wood casing. Sometimes if it's a softer wood, when it's shipped, I think what can happen is that lead core can break. And then as you're shaving it away, you're just reaching these points where these broken sections. I've gone through and I've lost an entire pencil before just because it was just broken there. And so that's where it's worth kind of experimenting with different brands to see what you come up with. If you are wondering, the recording of this is going to go up after it's done, so feel free to kind of watch now, and then if you want to follow along later, you can. So we're going to dig right into it. Oh, Connie, you just asked that question. So yes, this goes up as a recording. You're going to find all the other episodes. This is episode number 34. So we've got quite a few of them. And each day I just try to come up with a subject that that is interesting to me and in particular will help me develop a specific skill, not only in drawing, but also that I can apply to my own painting as well. So this whole series is just around me trying to challenge myself to improve my drawing skills, bring everybody along together so that we can kind of go through this process together. And it's been really helpful to have all of your comments come through and helping me through some trouble spots as well. So I'm just going to get started here. I've kind of zoomed in a little bit as much as I could. I also made some adjustments to the camera position, so if I dip into the shot, let me know. I'm going to do my best to not do that. Mike, you've been working on a polar bear. That's pretty awesome. So what I'm doing right now, using the Ebony Pencil here, I'm just kind of roughing in the form, utilizing the side of the pencil. I don't want to engage the point of the pencil. For those of you who've been watching the series, you hear me talk about that a lot. And the reason is if I shift to this grip, this tripod grip, and I engage the tip of the pencil, if I'm pointing that down into the paper, it has a tendency to emboss on the page and make a more permanent line that I'd like at this stage. If I allow the side of the pencil to kind of scrape across the surface, then that material is more likely to float across there and I can remove it later and adjust later. This is all about just kind of basic orientation on the page, getting a sense for where everything is going to be, and getting marks on the page so I have something to react to as I go through. I'm doing my best to just simply fall into the basic structure, kind of reacting to the basic structure, looking at the leaves, looking at the strawberry. But again, I just want to get information on the page that will allow me to have something to make concrete decisions about. As you can see, I'm kind of locking my wrist, drawing from my arm, drawing from my shoulder. And I'm already starting to see a basic structure of light and dark on the page. You can see I'm not worried about any of the details at this point. I just want to think about where is this strawberry going to go. I'm going to trust that I can erase out some of the highlights later. That's what I was able to do in the previous one that I was just showing you. But I don't want to be consumed by any sort of detail right now. This is very gestural thinking. Learning the skill of drawing gesture drawings, creating gesture drawings is really helpful. And what a gesture is ultimately it's a reaction to the subject and allowing your arm to simply synchronize with your observations and kind of build up that hand-eye coordination. It's about reacting to the form and the way the object fills the space rather than being consumed by the details. And it's allowing marks to kind of in an abstract way correspond to the nature of the material you're observing. So for example, the berry itself has one particular quality, one particular texture. The leaves there have another, and so as you start to react to it, you might try to observe like what marks might be different in each of those areas, so they can be distinguished in your drawing. I'm seeing this alternating sequence of light and dark, where it's generally lighter down in here. It's not white. I don't want this to be all white here. But over here is lighter against the dark leaves. We come over here and then that leaf becomes lighter against that dark background. And then down in here, that background is a little bit lighter against the darker strawberry. So I'm trying to observe that basic structure. And as you can see, I did kind of a rough line, but I'm trying to get rid of the outline as much as possible. I'm trying not to be thinking in terms of contour lines. Something that I haven't brought up in several episodes, but there's a difference between an outline and a contour line, and that can be important, especially as we get going later on in the drawing. A contour line is a line that represents the three-dimensional quality of an object. So it follows the contour of an object, but is specifically designed to express the fact that it's a three-dimensional object. It's defining the edge of an object. An outline is simply a two-dimensional line that follows along the outer edge of an object. That outline may not necessarily be descriptive of its three-dimensional form. So they often get used interchangeably, and if I do, I try to catch myself as much as possible and be precise with my language. But I want to put that out there to begin with. So I bring that up because when you're going for realism, it can often be beneficial to reduce the amount of contour lines in your drawing and instead try to focus on value relationships, because contour lines don't exist in reality. They're abstract concepts that we've developed that defines where one object ends and another begins. It's a symbol for an edge. And it's very natural for us to represent objects using contour lines, but it can also impede our ability to create something that looks realistic. And then in your drawing, as the artist, you get to control how much of that line you bring in, how much you get rid of. Is it all line? Are you using it just in certain areas to add some expressive quality to the drawing? You get to control that balance, and when you rely on that edge to be defined by a line. So as you can see, what I'm doing is just trying to roughly block in some of these forms. It's all very light. Now I want to kind of get into that strawberry, and if I squint my eyes, all those details disappear, and I can see a general structure where it's kind of darker towards this end here, a little bit lighter along in here. The light is strongest here, but there's really not a strong line of termination that, and this is something that I explore a lot in some of the earlier episodes, is that line of termination. A line of termination is an area on an object that's being struck by light and has a defined shadow side where that light ends and that shadow begins. We don't really have that here. Instead, the light source is coming in from this direction, and we get these small reflections. So the density of those reflections is ultimately what defines the three-dimensional form. But until I get to that point, I want to use whatever I can to help create some sort of three-dimensional object here. Look for some variations in the values. And I'm trying to alternate the direction of my marks so I don't have everything kind of moving in one direction or the other. Just trying to do some cross-hatching here to build up values and layers of value. And you can see my hand is already getting dirty. If you've been following along, I don't mind getting dirty at all. I prefer to get messy. It's too much of a distraction if I have to think about protecting my hand. I need to have all my focus on the object that I'm drawing. But that we're each going to have our own kind of relationship with the materials and what works for us. So as you can see, I like to build up and then kind of wipe it down, and that helps to create smooth transitions. So if I get these lines, they kind of soften a bit. And then it starts to, season the paper is a term that I use. So once you start to build up a few layers of it, then things really start to float on the surface a bit more. And I really like that when that happens. So you notice that those first few passes, those marks become really kind of strong. But as you start to build up layers, then you can start to build really nice fine gradations. Brania, your face gets dirty after drawing. I know exactly what you mean. We often kind of are in contact with our faces more than we realize, and I've done that so many times. The real kicker is in painting with phthalo blue. Holy smokes, that'll get everywhere. So. Liz, you're asking, I purchased a collection set of charcoal and great Strathmore paper. Yeah, Strathmore makes wonderful paper as well. And I think it's really important that you take time to experiment with different papers and find what works for you. It's something that is, I find, especially in the beginning, if you're just getting started or it's been a while, we often ignore the role that paper plays in the drawing, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, we put so much emphasis in the pencil that we have in our hand and the marks that we're making, but it's helpful to remind ourselves that the drawing is a relationship between the marks and the surface. And so being mindful of what that surface is doing and how it's affecting those marks can be illuminating, especially if you're prone to be self-critical. I find that I've worked with students in the past, and they get really frustrated because their marks aren't working, it's not erasing, it's not holding the material, things like that. And they put it on themselves. They think they're doing something wrong. And when I point out that, you know, it could just be the paper, then it kind of opens their minds a little bit. And so experimenting with different surfaces, I think, is really critical, because, you know, it may work great on one surface, but then not on another. And I think challenging yourself to adapt to a new surface is helpful in experimenting and exploring new mark making approaches and things like that. It's kind of like, you know, when you're learning to drive, you know, it's helpful to, you know, drive in icy conditions on gravel roads, you know, in you know, rain and at night. All of those, the different conditions can help you develop new skills, and you start to adapt to those new situations. So the paper is something that you can adapt to as well. Like I said, I've really enjoyed working on these Hahnemuhle papers. It really works for me. So all right, so what I'm trying to do again now is I'm starting to do some negative drawing in here around some of these leaves. And I can use my eraser to kind of pull out some of those shapes. And I need to ask myself how precise I need to be with the proportions on this. As I'm working through this, I know that I have a lot of work ahead of me to manage this that's happening in here. And if I spend all of my time working up here, it's going to take a little while for you guys to get to the real fun stuff. And so I'm going to try to just get through, you know, at least some of these earlier stages of the leaves here a little bit quicker. Really, all this is doing is it's kind of setting the stage for that. What I want to do is look at the basic relationships. So if I look at the reference photo, the distance between, you know, from here, of the length of that leaf is equivalent to about 2 of the lengths of the strawberry. So the leaf is about half the length of the fruit, the berry part. So, and that gives me a rough idea of how large that leaf will be. And I'm going to choose to not be too precise with it. As long as I get in the ballpark, I think I'm going to be happy. It's going to read as that leaf, or as a leaf. Still utilizing the side of the pencil. And I can apply a bit more pressure to get more depth in those marks. Let's see, it's just checking here for any questions. Shout out if all caps helps. This is all going to be, it's all going to be very light right now in these early stages because of these initial layers of the graphite. So if you're having trouble seeing it, that is why. So I've kind of learned throughout the series that working in just a regular graphite pencil, like a 2B, it doesn't quite show up on camera, so I have to go a little bit darker. There's this leaf that curls over here that I really like. It catches the light a little bit. Squinting my eyes to try to observe just the basic shape. And again, I'm seeing some areas that are a little bit off and I need to make that calculation as opposed to to figure out how I want to address that. You know, and like I said, I think I want to live with some of these proportions being off, and instead kind of get into the meat of the drawing a little bit more quickly. So I'm just kind of blocking in this, again, utilizing the side of the pencil. It also helps me to build up a large area very quickly. That can be one of the challenges when working with graphite, is there's a tendency to want to use the point and to hold the pencil like we write. And it can be very time consuming to build up a value that way. If you tilt it on its side, then you've got a nice wide surface with which you can make your marks. And you can fill in those areas very well. So part of what this is requiring, though, is me visualizing the path first. So my eyes are moving very quickly back and forth between the reference photo and the drawing. And when I come to the paper, I'm trying to hold that shape in my mind, hold that path, get a sense for where I need to go, how long of these marks do I need to make, and then try to build those marks, build those shapes up from that. So as opposed to drawing an outline first, kind of over-exaggerated that shape there, and then kind of adjusting the shape, kind of working from the inside out. This is the way I refer to it often, as a kind of an inside-out drawing process. So you're starting from the interior of the form and working your way out, as opposed to working from the outside in. So again, just looking at these shapes and trying to react to them. Here we go. So hopefully you can start to see that form coming together there. And then once I get to a certain point, it'll be enough that it won't be a distraction from when I get into some of those detailed areas there. And this is, you know, maybe I can get a little expressive with the line work here. The shading stump, what's going to happen now is you're going to see this start to darken some of these forms as it fills in some of those crevices. But I want to be thinking very similarly to how I just created those marks. You always want to be contributing to the form. It's becoming a mantra for this course, is whatever material you've got is an opportunity to contribute to your understanding of what that form is. So if I'm seeing anything that needs to change in terms of proportions, I can be doing that at this stage as well. The shading stump doesn't have to be just a means of smoothing out a surface. It's an opportunity as well. And I love what it does here. Again, it just kind of fills in some of those spots, so it pulls out the richness of the marks that you're making. Also helps me to kind of simulate what I would be doing if this were a brush, if I were to be painting this right now. There's some texture that I can start to account for. Again, just trying to get through this fairly quickly here. So I don't want this to become something that I get bogged down in, but I do need to have it established. Just use my fingertips and I could feel it, the oils on those fingers kind of engaging with the surface of the paper. So as I do this, one of the things I'm trying to be aware of is where I apply pressure. If I keep constant pressure, you can start to see these edges forming. And then I have to go through the process of kind of smoothing them out if they become distractions. So one of the ways to avoid that is try to kind of rock your material. So this can be done with the graphite or the shading stump. Apply the pressure at the center of your marks and kind of lift up on either end. and then helps to get rid of some of those kind of the denser marks at the end of a stroke. So. All right, let's see. I've got the drawing in front of me, I've got the reference image, I also have the reference image here, so I'm kind of utilizing all of those together. So with the image in front of me, might be a good time for you to step back. So set it up against a wall or something, step across, look at it from across the room, and then kind of walk your way up to it. And I think it's helpful to push that a bit farther. You know, oftentimes what I'll see is I'll ask students to step back from their work, and they'll go from here to here, right? You know, and that is helpful, but not quite as helpful as if you were 6 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet away, and then gradually moving your way up and try to see what happens to the space. What falls apart at the distance and what comes into view. Because when you're right up on it, especially with something that's light in value like a graphite, we start to calibrate to those values a little bit differently, and we see it in higher detail and higher resolution than what we would see at a distance. And so as a result, what can happen sometimes is we can spend hours or days working on a drawing, and we're right up close to it, we get every little detail, we step back from it, and everything falls apart. It doesn't quite have the value contrast or the structure that holds it all together. So stepping back at it, looking at it from a distance, is a way to observe that structure and make sure that the drawing holds up. You know, for the purposes of this, you know, all of these drawings that I'm working on here are for my own enjoyment. I'm not working on it to show in a gallery or anything like that. If I were, then that would be, you know, really important, because I want my artwork to catch a viewer's eye when they walk into that room. This, again, is just an exercise for me, so I'm less concerned by that, but it might be something that affects how you interpret your drawing. Okay, so let me see. Just want to check these questions here. Ninja Cat Gaming. For some reason, I never get the lines and shades perfect. And again, that's why we practice, right? You're going to gradually get better and better, but it is important to identify also what you are doing right, what you're happy with, so you can continue that on as well. And play around with different materials, play around with different surfaces, and you'll get there. And then I see this other person saying, half close your eyes and you can see the tone. So exactly, so squinting is a really helpful tool to help prioritize the value relationships in the subject. It gets rid of the details, so you get less consumed by them, and also engages I believe it engages the rods in your eyes to a greater degree than the cones. The cones are kind of prioritize color awareness, whereas the rods really kind of prioritize the intensity of the light, which correlates more to the value relationship. So squinting does a great job with that. Also, then, like I explained in the previous episode, alternating between squinting and then flooding your eyes. So I'll often open my eyes as wide as I can, intentionally blur them, allow the light to flood in, and see what happens there, and then squint down again and eliminate the amount of light that's coming in. So play around with different ways of observing, and I find that ultimately what's most valuable is to practice the skill of squinting and looking at it through blurred vision. I kind of take that for granted, but as I'm doing all of this, my eyes are out of focus. So even as I'm looking at the screen, it's all mostly blurry. And all right, are we back? Sorry about that. Let's see. I lost the video connection. I'm not sure what happened here, but everything just kind of cut out. But I think we're all back. Everybody back with us? Yes. All right. Good. Oh, that's always so much fun. I have a feeling that was on my end. I'm not sure. It just says I lost internet connection, so it just blipped on us. So, all right. I am glad we're back. I don't know where we were at, but we'll keep going. That's what makes it fun. Seeing all the lost connections here. Jade, you're asking, based on what you decide to use, charcoal or graphite for the subject? Yeah, I kind of, there are two things that I'm really looking for when I'm deciding what material to use. And the first one is ultimately, what is my objective? Like, what do I want to get out of the drawing here? And what kind of experience do I want to have? So for example, the experience that I wanted to have with this is one where I'm a bit more focused, I'm a bit tighter, more confined. The previous drawing that I did with the charcoal, I really felt like I needed to be expressive. I was trying to react to what my, kind of more like what my body wanted out of that whole thing. Because one of the things that I've said before, but in previous episodes, but I like to reiterate, is that there are two drawings. There's drawing, and then there's the drawing, right? And I tend to prioritize drawing, the act of drawing itself. And if I put my attention on what I'm doing there, and I really allow myself to kind of experience the act of drawing, then I can trust that as I come out of it, the drawing will reflect that. The object of the drawing will have some sort of reflection of that experience that I had. Now, for you though, like it depends on what your relationship is with that part of it. Is it about the drawing, or is it about the act of drawing? So again, one of the first things I look for is like, what experience do I want to have? And then I also look at what the subject is, and especially what the reference photo is that I've got available to me, and then I try to see, well, what makes sense for that. So I did a rose drawing last week on our Facebook Live. Yeah, I initially worked on it in graphite, and I really liked the time that I had making it, but in the end, it was really flat, and it didn't express the light that I found present in the reference photo. So then I tried it again in charcoal, and I found that it worked much better. It kind of aligned better with what I was going for. So, hopefully that explains a bit about it. There's kind of two things there. So I'm going to come back down here. Everybody, we're back. Am I still out of focus? Hopefully not. Yeah, it says I've got excellent connection here for streaming, so it should be okay. Everything seems clear on my end here. So what I'm doing now here, this is really where the focus comes in. And I may stop talking after a little while. I may find that I get a little kind of caught into it. What I'm doing is I'm looking for the patterns in the seeds. And I'm trying to see especially what happens as we wrap around the contour of the object, so the cross contour of it. And what I see happening is there's this one pattern that generally kind of creates these concentric rings, but then there's this other one that kind of falls along this direction here, so they kind of cross over one another. And they're not perfect, but they're kind of relatively close. And so I'm kind of I'm trying to look at those paths that those seeds are following along. And I'm just using my shading stump because it creates a very soft mark, and I'm really trying not to bear down too much because I'm going to have to erase out some of those highlights. And if I really smudge it too much, then it's going to cause trouble. And then as I'm doing that, I'm trying to observe what's happening with those seeds and the little divots that are along the surface of the strawberry that are holding the seeds. As we wrap around the top of the strawberry, we're shearing across it, and they just become these thin kind of slivers. So I'm just trying to observe some of these paths a little bit. And for me, again, as long as I get close, I'm going to be happy with this one. As long as I express something about the nature of the strawberry. If I miss a seed or if things are off just a little bit, that's going to be okay. If I have these big areas where they're missing, then it might not be. So I need to find the balance that I'm comfortable with, and you're going to have your own kind of relationship with that. You may find yourself wanting to kind of more kind of compulsively get every seed in its right spot. And that's completely fine, completely up to you. But this, in addition to helping me to map out where things go, helps me just to become familiar with the form and make observations. All right, so hopefully that makes sense what I'm doing here, and again, find for yourself how precise you need to be. As I'm looking at paths that follow along this direction of the contour, it's becoming difficult. But as you can see, just by adding these lines, it starts to express more of the three-dimensional nature of that strawberry, and you can see that form starting to come together. So yes, exactly. This is the hardest part, and that's why I like this subject here. I got a question about combining charcoal and graphite. Generally, they don't work well together. You might be able to find a paper that will work for both at the same time, but what tends to happen is, especially with graphite, it's a harder material and it creates a smoother, slicker surface than charcoal. So trying to go on top of this with charcoal, it would just slump off. Charcoal needs tooth on the paper in order to hold it on there. I'm using, again, this Cretacolor Nero. I had already shaved off the Creta part, but it seems to kind of accept the layers of graphite a little bit better. It seems to hold on to it. This is it's a kind of a recent tool that I've discovered, and I really like it. We did a video shoot with Keiko Tanabe, who's a watercolorist, and she was using this for some sketching before she was doing her watercolor, and it was awesome to see her use that. But you can see that gets a little bit darker as well. A carbon pencil might also work as well. It gets darker. It's a kind of a mixture of charcoal and graphite. So this is again, the Cretacolor Nero. So that's just to kind of illustrate that. It gets a little bit darker in some of those areas. And I'm utilizing it on the side for some of these broad areas because I want to preserve the pencil tip for some of the fine details. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. Let's see, I want to try to come back in here. What I'm doing right now is it required a certain amount of concentration to establish those lines. I was really more focused. I need to clear my head a little bit, so I'm working on some of these areas that are a little bit more forgiving. Actually, here's what I want to do. I think I want to kind of call out this leaf here, but I'm going to do that in line. So I'm going to break from that reference photo. I just feel like creating a linear edge. And be a little bit sketchy. I kind of need that. I'm feeling, just kind of reacting to what my arm is doing. It's like, it's going to be so kind of tight and controlled in here. I need an area where I can just kind of loosen up. And I think that I'm going to utilize these leaves as an opportunity there. And maybe balance that, maybe that contrast between the looseness over here and the kind of more confined, tighter drawing on this side will be interesting. Okay, back to this section here. So one of the things you can kind of observe as well is looking at the shape of those highlights there. They kind of take on a diamond pattern, almost like fish scales. And so what I'd like to do is to start to map those out, and I can start to utilize some of these lines here. Where they intersect are generally where I want to place some of those darker areas. And so if I use this as kind of as a map, I'm going to start with this one kind of seed in here, roughly draw in that shape. thinking both about the positive shape and the negative shape. So as I'm working in this area, I'm looking at that darker shape of that kind of dimple where the seed sits, and then the negative shape of that highlight. And kind of working on those together. Utilizing the side of the pencil, I'm intentionally trying to avoid outlines as much as possible at this stage. Because what's going to happen is if I outline these forms, it's going to overwhelm the surface. It's going to overwhelm the texture. All those lines are going to pop to the surface, and I want to make sure I don't do that. So what this is requiring is for me to hold in my mind where those highlights are going to be, and then try to think both in terms of positive space and negative space at the same time, kind of leave the reflections kind of exposed there. And then with this grid kind of on the surface, it gives me some orientation points so I can kind of check my scale and the proportions there. Just checking. Oh, Cynthia asking if I shaved the shading stump. I did not. It just comes like this. But one thing I do notice is as I work with it, that point starts to push in. So some of my older ones are really beat to heck, and they're just kind of flattened out. So if you need to, you can actually kind of poke in from the inside and push that point out there. Mike, you're asking about limiting the range in terms of the graphite, and I do not. I honestly, I try not to spend too much time concerning myself with the specific material because I don't ever want to limit myself when drawing. I want the ability to essentially be able to pick up whatever material I've got and make that work. And in part, I developed that after working with students who I would see they just wouldn't make anything if they didn't feel like they had the materials. So they say, well, I don't have my 6B, I can't do this drawing. And to me, that's heartbreaking, right? You know, like you're missing an opportunity to draw, and whether or not it's going to turn out, you know, again, there's the drawing and then there's drawing. Maybe the drawing isn't going to work out the way you want, but if that's an opportunity to have an opportunity to grow through a drawing process, to have a good drawing experience, you don't want to miss out on that. So honestly, like what I carry around with me most of the time is just a regular yellow No. 2 pencil. That is so versatile and I can get so much out of it. For this series, though, I like to experiment with different materials and see where that leads me. So, okay, so now you can start to see this rough kind of highlight here. This is a primary one here. There's lots of little ones too that I can work with, but I try to create it without using an outline. Thinking both positive space and negative space. This becomes an orientation point, and what I might do now is start to kind of indicate where those seeds are going to be. So just using that shading stump, I can start to give myself some kind of some indications of each of these seeds here. So I'm kind of looking at some of those intersections. I'm checking against my reference as well. And I'm trying to observe the spacing and how it changes as we move from the outer, kind of rolling underneath the strawberry. So this starts to become a bit more strategic than some of the other drawings that we've done in this series. but I kind of need it, and I think that's ultimately the experience that I was looking for. Is to kind of stretch that muscle a bit, that strategy muscle. And the question I get all the time in this, I've noticed, is, as you're saying, that like mad moments go, the more you observe the image, it becomes easier to draw it. Exactly. It's all about observation for me. And the questions I get a lot in this series is, why don't I use a grid? Or why don't I trace the image? That's a kind of a foolproof way of getting all those proportions correct. And my answer to that is that while it is, for me, there's no, right or wrong tool. There's just what serves the drawing. And so ultimately, what's going to serve my experience and what my intended outcome is I'm here to learn about the object and understand it more deeply, and also develop the skills of observations, because I want to be able to get out on location and work in situations where I don't have the image printed out where I can utilize a grid. That's primarily what I spend more time doing, is painting outdoors. And so those are skills that I'm trying to develop through the drawing process. So, all right. So this is where it's going to get really tricky. I've got all those reflections. I'm going to let that sit for a bit. I'm going to move on to something else, kind of work on this area and gradually work my way into there. Let's see. Just checking here, see if there's any questions. Yeah, Wilma, that's exactly it. Wilma, you say it's odd. A simple thing like a strawberry is quite a complicated thing to draw. That is exactly it. I should have written that in my description because that's the heart of this whole drawing process, is that, I'm like, that's pretty. I like it. I'm going to sit and draw this thing. And then you get into it and you're like, holy smokes, there's a lot happening there. So one of the things that is really kind of critical in this is really observing the edges. The edges of, especially the reflections, are what indicates the nature, the texture of the surface. So that's, if you're working on texture, it all comes down to observing what's happening with the reflections at the edges of the reflections. The more diffuse it is, the rougher the surface. The sharper those edges are, the more reflective and smooth that surface. And so that's what we're observing here, is that these reflections have very sharp edges. All right, so, and I'm going to come back in and start to refine those a little bit later. Yeah, let's see, hopefully everything's doing all right. Hopefully the stream is coming in. It still says it has a decent connection here, but I have a feeling this is going to run about 2 hours long. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to shade in this. I'm just going to smooth this out a little bit. I can still see roughly where those seeds are. And I'm not concerning myself with the small reflections at this point in that area. And here's what I'm going to do, I think. So again, this is the tricky spot. I'm kind of setting myself up for this. And I'm looking for, there's a higher density of brighter highlights in here, and I want to try to preserve a little bit. But these finer highlights in this area, I'm less concerned with. So let me just build up some of those values. So I can still roughly see the map that I have for those seeds. All right. So now what I'm going to do is, now I can bring in the eraser. And one of the things I'm observing in this area here, there's little highlights underneath. They catch on the underside of the little dimples there. So I can utilize this rubber eraser. And I can kind of pull out a highlight underneath each of these. And I'm overstating it. These are far too big. But just a kind of a short little wiggle on each one can be enough to kind of pull out some of that light. There's kind of one right here in the center that is a bit more visible. And now it's just smudging. Let me see if I've got a better eraser. Actually, I'm going to open up. I got this brand new one that I found. I was really excited. I recently moved, and then I discovered this brand new eraser. That's working. That's better. Yeah. So that other one that I had was just old, so it wasn't really pulling out the light the way I wanted it to. And so what I'm doing now is I'm just trying to, I have my rough map where the seeds go, and I'm looking at the highlights and I'm trying to figure out where they are in relationship to each of those divots. So as we move up here, then those highlights happen on the sides of them rather than the top and bottom. And as you can see, again, I'm overstating them. As we come over here, they move on the top side of those divots. Okay, so now what I can do is come back in and cut back down into these highlights to refine them. So what I'll do is I will use my shading stump, kind of work up to those edges and refine them. If I need, if I just need more control, if there's not enough in there, I can use my pencil here. And I want to be careful if you're kind of refining some of these highlights, try to avoid a hard line. If I draw a hard line around those highlights, that highlight's just going to pop off. So I'm just trying to kind of lightly describe the edge of that highlight and then fill that in a little bit more. So this whole process, like there's a build-up, there's a takedown. We're going to be doing each of these divots and each of these seeds multiple times. Just kind of clear in my mind a little bit. And just, again, I want to be mindful of the direction of my marks and the line work, because I want to avoid lines, especially on the interior here, because it's going to degrade the form. But this kind of, again, just refines those marks, and at this point I've lost sight of the where I am in the reference. I'm just like, when I come back to the reference photo, I don't know where I'm at anymore. And that's all right. I'm just going to keep going, and now I can start to react to what's happening on the page. Does it feel believable? Kind of thinking more gesturally rather than 100% accuracy. But you're going to define for yourself what you want out of that. If you want 100% accuracy, I know plenty of artists that thoroughly enjoy getting in there and getting every little detail. I get a little claustrophobic when I do that. I feel a tightness of breath when I try to spend too much time rendering the details, so I avoid that. One of the courses we have is a watercolor course called The Secrets of Hyperrealist Watercolor, where John Bayalis is the artist, and man, he can sit with those paintings for forever and get in there in those details. And he knows how to hold the form together. He knows how to do that in a way that you don't lose the form over the detail. All right, so I want to now start to kind of just smooth out some of the texture in there in between the highlights. All right. Oh, is the noise? That's the noise of the pencil giving you trouble. Yeah, Ninja Cat. Yeah, I hear you. Scritchy Scratchy's not working for you, huh? All right. Get some of those highlights. We kind of lose them down in here. I'm not going to worry about any of those details because if I squint even just a little bit, any of those highlights disappear, and I may try to get them in a little bit later. But now I think what I want to do is identify some of the highlights here. I think it's the highlights along in here that are going to be more important. And this is where it's helpful to really observe the kind of the general shape. What's happening with those highlights? How do they relate to each of those divots? And in this area, again, it's kind of like a fish scale, or almost a diamond pattern that rings around each of those divots. So I'm overstating those highlights. And then I'm going to cut back in and refine them even more. So you may end up just kind of sitting back and watching while I kind of do this. Some people like that. I'm going to do my best to continue to talk, but I can feel myself wanting to just kind of tighten up. And I've already lost my orientation a bit. I've lost where I'm at. And I think I got to ask myself, is that okay? If I look at this, does it still read as a strawberry? And I feel like it's doing that pretty well. So I'm not going to beat myself up for losing track of where I am. All right, looks like Football Fever is trying to contribute something, but not being helpful. I appreciate you all, the positive contributions. So now what I'm doing is that now I'm again thinking both kind of in terms of positive space and negative space, looking at the relationship between the reflections and the darker values here, and observing really how there's quite a bit of this this diamond pattern that kind of interlocks. So this is where the focus comes in, and trying to get the overall an overall understanding of the basic structure, and then again decide for yourself how far do you want to push it in terms of 100% accuracy. You know, I guess that's the nature of impressionism, right? Is that are you capturing the impression of the object? Is it all about the accuracy and almost creating a photographic representation of it? And what's great is that there's, you know, it's all been validated, so you get to decide for yourself what's, you know, what's working. So what works for you. I think what I tend to respond to in artwork when I see it is when I can sense that there is a relationship between the materials and the artist. All right, it's just like listening to music when, you know, you listen to a great, you know, improvised solo or something where the artist has just gotten into it and they become more aligned. They're thinking through whatever instrument they've got, and I love seeing that in art when you get a sense that the artist is thinking through drawing, thinking through the charcoal, thinking through oil paints or pastels, and you're seeing the artist's mind there. All right, so now there's little highlights here. There was a question in the last episode, and I'm not sure, I can't remember who asked it, but I'm really kicking myself that I shut it off right when that question came in. We were about getting fine lines with the eraser. And that can certainly be a challenge. But in general, the technique that I use is, you can, with a rubber eraser, you can kind of put it on there, and just a real short, kind of quick vibration, it can be enough to kind of often pull up a little bit of that material. And I'll often take a razor blade and I'll carve it to get the shape that I want. So I'm hoping that this gives you all a sense of a certain kind of strategy that can be adopted to manage the detail here. You're all going to find a different way of working, and again, you may prefer to, trace the image, use a grid. That's just not the objective that I have for myself, but it's all good. All right. So hopefully you can see those highlights kind of forming, and you can start to see those divots. Yeah, a lot of spam happening. Thank you, Carol. I want to shout out to Carol on our team who monitors that and help block the block the spam. I guess that's one way of living life. So. Moving over to this area here, because this requires a little less thought. My brain is starting to get a little fried right now. Again, I think it's just kind of in my nature to, it's been so long since I've had that impulse to really get in and get work in the fine details. And I found myself kind of craving that a little bit with this reference photo, but I see my nature kind of kicking in. I just want to kind of just go like this across the surface, which I guess that'd be one way of doing it. All right, here we go. And now I've got this Nero, this Cretacolor, and I'm going to see how this works for me. I think it just provides a little bit more depth and contrast. All right, I see a lot of good comments here. So what I'm observing here is I want to be careful not to make this edge consistently sharp. I'm looking for areas where it might be a little bit clearer than others. But if anything, I want that edge to be a bit more soft and bring more detail right in this area here to help create that three-dimensional quality. But it's a little bit too fuzzy in some areas for my liking. So I'm just kind of coming in to define that edge. Little line work here and there, but I don't want there to be a hard and consistent line along the contour, because that will flatten it out. So that starts to come together there. My back is not liking this stool. So I'm kind of contorting myself to fit, kind of adjust to that. All right, I think what I need to do is I need to kind of ignore the reference for a little bit. Now that I'm in the drawing, I can start to see the strawberry on the paper kind of taking shape, and now I can start to build this and then deprioritize the reference image. What I'm looking at in the reference image is, what are the visual signs? What's the language, the visual language I'm seeing in the reference? Is it high contrast? Is it low contrast? Are they kind of tight shapes, more open, things like that? And then allow the drawing to kind of reflect that that basic language more than 100% accurately representing it, because I know I'm too far off, and at this point it would make for less exciting video for you to watch me kind of correct the placement of each individual strawberry seed here, if that makes sense. So So now essentially what I'm doing is I'm looking at the spaces between those highlights and I'm trying to fill those in, try to visualize where those seeds are going to be, and I'm looking for those shapes, and I'm not placing the individual seeds yet. I want to make those areas visible, and then I'm going to come back in later and suggest the seeds themselves. I need to be utilizing the side of the pencil. That helps to keep that point sharp for when I need it for those seeds. And I'm trying to be mindful of the light and dark areas. Here we go. All right, so I'm trying to kind of smooth out things a little bit, see if there's any kind of blotches or kind of high spots, low spots that I can start to be kind of filling in. Alice, you're going to try the charcoal landscape. I think that's a fantastic idea. I hope you all get a chance to share your work. Again, if you go to artistnetwork.com, there's a link in the description below that will take you to the Drawing Together page. And from there, you'll see a list of each of the episodes, each of the subjects for the episodes. If you click on those, that'll bring up the discussion field where people have been sharing work, and it's just been awesome. Awesome to see. So I'm just kind of filling these in. I can use my shading stump, and then what that does is that it kind of knocks down the bright spots caused by the tooth of the paper, so that it kind of helps to isolate the highlights a little bit. And you want to be careful. And I found myself trying to do that there, kind of outlining with the shading stump, outlining the highlights. But then again, we want to try to get rid of the lines as much as possible. So just be mindful of that, what you're doing with those edges. And if you can, and try to run your marks here at a different angle than the edge of that highlight. So we've got this highlight here that runs vertically, so what I should be doing is turning this horizontally, kind of working my way up to it. Just kind of makes for a cleaner edge. All right, well, I appreciate that comment about the leaves there, and really that was, I think it's holding up. It just kind of shows you that you don't need a lot of detail to convey an object. If you get the basic form right, the basic light and shadow right, and then the viewer's eye is going to fill in the details and create the understanding of texture. All right, here we go. So I think that's working out all right. We're starting to see kind of the surface quality of the strawberry here because of the relationship, or the nature of those reflections, the edges of those reflections. They're sharp, but not a precise outlined line, and that starts to create that. So now what we can do is we can kind of go back in and start to add some of the seeds, and I'm going to try to suggest them. I've got my little kind of indicators. So rather than draw a line around each of the seeds, what I'm trying to do is observe, each seed is a little bit different. Some have kind of, they're kind of darker all around the edges of the seeds. Some are just these little, kind of indicators. And so I'm utilizing, I like to hold my pencil like this. If you're new, you haven't seen this, but some of the other returning students, you'll see me do this. I kind of hold it almost like a chopstick, right? And that allows me to kind of roll my hand to get that sharp point, but also just kind of engage the tip, but it gives me the same amount of control that I would have if I were using a tripod grip like I'm writing. So it gives me the control of that grip without actually engaging the point of the pencil, if that makes sense. I don't know what that grip is called. I've seen other artists use it as well, but this is kind of something that just naturally came about as I was drawing, and I found myself doing that. So I'm not counting each and every seed, but I'm kind of roughly looking at kind of where I am in the region of that strawberry, and then try to say, like, what's the general shape of the seeds in that spot? So that'll help me to create that sense of it wrapping around. So as I'm looking here, I'm looking more directly at the seeds, so they start to become more open. And I'm just kind of suggesting them as much as possible, just little taps on the page, rather than fully rendering each and every spot. So then as we, talking about the shapes, as we wrap around here, we're kind of shearing across the side of it, and we're just seeing these thin little marks that I can suggest. And then here in this region here, the seed sits within that, so I can start to suggest that seed in there. So my hope is that when we look at this, we think, oh, it's a strawberry. Not get overwhelmed by all the seeds, if that makes sense. That light is really large. Let's thin that out. As we come in under here, they kind of change their angle. They become a little bit more squished and kind of at this angle. And it's hopefully coming together. My reference image seems to be, my iPad here seems to be nearly dead, so it may quit on me. So again, now I'm just kind of going through, kind of just approximating the berries, and again, I'm just looking, kind of checking in with the drawing, with the reference image, not for the precise seed in each spot, but really what are the visual cues, what's the language I'm seeing in that shape that helps me to define that form. So I'm glad you're learning so much there, Wilma. Just checking here for other questions. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm reading that comment about this being sharp. Definitely be careful. I've stabbed myself with pencils many times because I wasn't really paying attention, or I'll reach down and grab one and they'll grab that point. But often I try not to worry too much about my pencils being sharp. That's why I utilize the side of the pencil as much as possible, because then as I work on the side, is always sharpening that point. So then when I need that control, that fine line, I can get it. Actually, right in here, I need to, this is actually sharpening the pencil now, as well as allowing me a place to just kind of clear my mind a little bit. It's like I'm stepping back from those seeds. Again, utilizing the side of the pencil here. I'm going to darken this. How does that look? All right. I really like this this pencil here. This Cretacolor. And it comes in different different tones, so that you can get like a gray, you can get a white, you can get a kind of a sepia toned. All right, so back to this again. I'm just checking in the reference image just to see, like, in this region, you know, what's happening with the seeds. Not necessarily look at that specific seed, because I would completely get lost and overwhelmed if I tried to make sure I get every little seed right. So I'm just going to suggest more kind of gestural sketching than anything. And right in here, I can kind of draw a little bit more detail in there. And I feel like one needs to go in here. So again, just looking at it for more for cues than anything. I've lost track of which specific seed I'm on, but that's all right. I love what's happening down in here, the depth of some of these. You can really see the shape. And as we come around here in that tip, again, we're kind of shearing across it. We get these thin little marks. So I'm hoping that what this does is give you some sort of guide for developing your own strategy for managing this detail so that you don't get overwhelmed, because I've done that so many times. I'll get to a subject and I'm like, screw this. I can't do that. That's just too much. And that didn't really serve me very well in the end. I lost that opportunity to learn from that. Sorry, I realized I was dipping into the shot. I'm going to do my best to try to stay out of that. But you know, I think that when we kind of self-censor because we don't think we can manage that detail, I think it's helpful to have some sort of strategy that you can rely on. So then you just builds that confidence. The next time something comes up and you're like, you know, I can do this, and maybe I don't quite know how yet, but I know that I've had that experience of managing detail and establishing a strategy as I go, breaking it down, determining what's ultimately important, and kind of going from there. So now that those are kind of established, you know, I feel like we could essentially call it quits now. We could keep going. I could add a few little highlights in some of these here if I want to. Again, just looking for the visual cues. Where do those highlights land? You know, may not necessarily match that photograph one-to-one, but hopefully it expresses an understanding of the fundamental visual cues. There's some highlights here that I think are going to be important, so I'm going to get those in there. So, and then if you're using that eraser, it's nearly impossible to get exactly that mark you need to erase out. And I'm not going to a white charcoal or a white chalk. I tried that in the previous one that I did, and it did not work out well at all. What it did is it just blended with the ebony pencil, and it created like this gray mud. Didn't really work. Cynthia is saying the most challenging of subjects we've done in weeks. I'm glad to see you're drawing along with that. So it was challenging. Jenna, you're asking, this is a Cretacolor, C-R-E-T-A color, and it's a Nero. This is made in Austria, so it was, I believe, Savoir-Faire makes this product or distributes this product. Or the company that makes Sennelier paints. All right, now let's see. Gonna kind of just blend in some of these areas here so that I can isolate the highlights, because I think what's happening is this is a little bit too bright. So I can knock that down, kind of smooth out some of these areas, isolate some of these highlights in here. But I think we're pretty much, I think we're probably as far as we can really kind of go with this for now. You know, I could keep working on this, but you're not going to see me do much substantively to the structure of this drawing. It's, you know, mostly just kind of tightening up, but I think you've seen pretty much all the strategy I can provide for this. I think Monday we're going to be working on the bonfire. I'm super excited for that one. So I'm going to try to get that one posted soon so you can see that image, but I've never drawn a flame like that, an open flame. So I'm really excited to see that. I'm going to be doing that in charcoal because I need that deep black value, and the graphite just not going to do it. So be prepared for charcoal on Monday, doing another flower next week as well, a different one. And there were questions early on about how long we're going to be doing this. We have no kind of intention of stopping this anytime soon. So my hope is we're going to keep going through at least through the summer. I'm having the time of my life doing this whole series. So I'm hoping we're going to keep doing this for as long as we can. So I appreciate that. We come every Monday, Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Again, you can find more information on artistnetwork.com. Be sure to subscribe. You'll get notifications when the next live stream happens. Sign up for our newsletters as well. There can be notifications there. If you go to artistnetwork.com, you can sign up for those newsletters. I know we're going to be starting to get our studios are up and running now, so I'm going to be back in the studio filming with artists very quickly so we can get some new videos for you. So I'm glad you all joined me for this. Again, it's challenging. I'm just going to read through the questions, make sure I got them. I know I missed some of you, so if I did, I apologize. I'm going to do my best to try to get to them. It can be a little challenging getting to all of them, but again, I appreciate you all. This has been a blast. Heather, you're asking, the highlights are killing me. I can't seem to set sharp ones this time using charcoal. Oh, charcoal can be tricky because in its nature it's softer, and then sometimes if you need a kind of a toothier paper, it can be really challenging. What you might try for that with charcoal, and we've talked a bit about spray fixative. If you're happy with it and you can't erase out those highlights, try spray fixing it and then going on top of it with a white charcoal pencil. So it provides a barrier so that white chalk on top of it doesn't mix with the charcoal underneath. Give that a shot and see if that works. So yeah, strawberry season out in Western Mass. Growing up in Maine, we used to go strawberry picking every summer, and it sure makes me miss it. So let's see. Not seeing any more questions, so I'm going to sign off. Thank you all. I'm getting a lot of good comments, so I really appreciate all the positive feedback here. I can't wait to see what you all have created, so go check out the page. I don't know if it's up yet, but keep checking back for the show page for this episode so I can see the drawings that you've got. Some people have also been tagging Artist Network on Instagram, Facebook, etc., and sharing work there. So it's all good. I just want to see what you're doing. Appreciate it. Have a great afternoon. Have a great weekend. And I will see you all on Monday.